You're 24 years old working as a hotel cleaner, and you accidentally walk into the wrong room. The most expensive suite in a luxury resort. What would you do? Panic and run. Clean quickly and hope no one finds out. Or something else. Entirely. What if I told you that this simple mistake would expose a CEO who had been secretly watching his employees for weeks, that it would lead to a public humiliation so cruel it would make your heart ache, and that it would ultimately transform not just one young woman's life, but an entire company's understanding of what true excellence really means? Have you ever wondered what happens when someone with real power finally sees the invisible people who make their world possible? When character gets tested not in the spotlight, but in the shadows where we think nobody's watching. This is the story of Nina Lane, a shy art student turned cleaning lady who thought her dreams were over. She had no idea that one wrong door would become the right path to everything she never dared to hope for. But first, she'd have to survive being torn down by someone who believed that keeping others small was the only way to stay big. In the misty mountains of Colorado, where pine trees stretch toward heaven and morning fog dances between peaks, stands the Solstice Valley Resort. It's the kind of place where luxury whispers rather than shouts, where crystal chandeliers catch mountain sunlight, and where guests pay thousands just to breathe the rarefied air of exclusivity. But our story doesn't begin in the marble lobbies or silk-draped suites. It begins in the staff quarters, in a cramped room barely larger than a closet, where Nina Lane sits cross-legged on her narrow bed, sketching by lamplight. Nina had always been invisible. Not in the magical sense of fairy tales, but in the crueler way of real life. She moved through spaces like a whisper, completing tasks with such quiet efficiency that people forgot she existed the moment she left the room. Her small frame seemed to shrink further under the weight of her oversized cleaning uniform, and her dark hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail that revealed a face that rarely met anyone's eyes. She hadn't planned to be a cleaning lady. 2 years ago, she'd been an art student at Denver University, her sketchbooks filled with dreams as vast as the Colorado sky. But dreams don't pay for medical bills when your father has a heart attack. Dreams don't keep food on the table when your family's small restaurant goes bankrupt. Dreams certainly don't support a younger brother who still believes his big sister will somehow make everything okay. So Nina folded her dreams into a neat square, tucked them away like the sketch pad she still carried everywhere, and learned to find dignity in work that others dismissed as menial. It was Tuesday morning when Nina made the mistake that would change everything. The autumn air carried that crisp bite that makes you feel grateful to be alive, and Nina was hurrying through her rounds, keycard in one hand, cleaning cart rattling softly behind her. Room 103. That's what her assignment sheet said. But the mountain air can make numbers blur, and exhaustion can make even careful people careless. When Nina slid her master key card into room 130, she didn't notice the small discrepancy. The door opened smoothly, and she stepped inside. The key. Royal Suite was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the mountain vista like a living painting. The furniture wasn't just expensive, it was art. Every surface gleamed with the kind of perfection that comes from craftsmen who love their work. The air itself seemed to whisper of privilege, of a world where people paid more for one night than Nina earned in 3 months. For a moment, she stood frozen. This wasn't right. She knew she wasn't supposed to be here. The royal suites were cleaned by senior staff only, people with years of experience and management trust. People who weren't Nina. She should have left immediately. That would have been the safe choice, the smart choice. But as Nina stood there, her artist's eye began to notice things that perhaps the regular cleaning staff, focused on efficiency, might miss. Dust on the intricate carved baseboards, water spots on the crystal light fixtures, small imperfections. That didn't belong in a space this precious. And something else stirred in Nina's heart. Not ambition or greed, but something simpler and perhaps more profound. Respect. This room was someone's temporary home, someone's sanctuary. If she had mistakenly entered their space, the least she could do was honor it properly. What Nina didn't know was that someone was watching. Grant Leo had built his fortune by paying attention to details that others overlooked. At 48, he was the kind of CEO who still remembered his first job washing dishes, who could calculate profit margins in his head, but never forgot that every number represented a real person with real dreams. His success hadn't come from ruthlessness, but from understanding that excellence grows from the ground up, from the dedication of people whose names never appear in annual reports. For the past month, Grant had been conducting what he called invisible audits of his resort chain. He'd check in under false names, observe operations from the ground level, and watch the security feeds to understand how his employees behaved when they thought no one of importance was watching. Because Grant had learned something that many executives never grasp. Character isn't what people show you during performance reviews. It's what they do in the quiet moments when they think they're alone. That Tuesday morning, Grant was reviewing the security footage from the royal floor when he noticed an unusual figure on the monitor. A young cleaning woman had entered Suite 130, clearly by mistake based on her startled expression. He leaned forward, expecting to watch her realize her error and quickly retreat. Instead, he witnessed something extraordinary. For the next 45 minutes, Grant watched Nina transform the already immaculate suite into something approaching perfection. She didn't just dust, she caressed each surface with a care that bordered on reverence. She didn't just vacuum, she moved furniture to reach corners that most people would ignore. She polished the windows until they disappeared completely, leaving only the mountain view hanging in space like a masterpiece. But it was the small things that caught Grant's attention. The way Nina straightened a painting that was tilted by perhaps 2 degrees, how she arranged the complimentary fruit bowl not just neatly, but artistically, creating a composition of color and form. The gentle way she handled a delicate sculpture, her touch speaking of someone who understood that beauty deserves respect. And then came the moment that would stay with Grant forever. As Nina prepared to leave, she pulled out a small piece of paper from her uniform pocket and began to write. Her handwriting was careful, each letter formed with the precision of someone who still believed that words mattered, that how you said something was as important as what you said. What she wrote would soon change both their lives forever. But first, someone else was about to discover Nina's mistake, and they wouldn't be nearly as understanding as Grant. Mr. Harold Denton represented everything that was wrong with privilege without responsibility. At 71, he wore his wealth like armor and his prejudices like badges of honor. He'd made his fortune in an era when workers were meant to be grateful for any job, and he'd never quite adjusted to a world where service workers were seen as human beings rather than furniture that moved. Denton had been a member of the resort's board of directors until Grant quietly bought out his shares, but old habits die hard, and Denton still acted as if he owned the place, still believed that his years of membership gave him the right to police the staff's behavior. That Tuesday afternoon, Denton was reviewing his bill when he noticed something unusual. The daily cleaning report showed that room 130, his room, had been serviced by someone named Nina Lane, but according to resort policy, the royal suites were supposed to be cleaned exclusively by senior staff members, people with at least 3 years of experience. Denton's investigation led him to the security office, where a review of the footage confirmed his suspicions. A junior cleaning woman had indeed entered his suite without authorization. In Denton's mind, this wasn't just a simple mistake. It was a violation of the natural order, a breach of the careful hierarchy that kept the world running smoothly. He demanded an immediate meeting with the floor manager, Nina, and any senior staff available. What happened next would become the subject of resort gossip for months to come. The conference room felt smaller, with Denton's anger filling it. Nina sat at the far end of the polished table, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the windows, where the mountains stood eternal and unchanging. "Explain to me." Denton's voice carried the authority of someone who'd never had to clean up after others. How a junior employee gains access to a royal suite without proper authorization. The floor manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, shifted uncomfortably. She'd worked in hospitality for 15 years and had learned to read the dangerous currents that could sink careers. Sir, it appears to have been an honest mistake, Nina thought. She was assigned to room 103, not 130. An honest mistake. Denton's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. Young lady, he turned to Nina, do you understand what kind of establishment this is? Do you comprehend the level of trust our guests place in us? Nina's voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. Yes, sir. I understand. Do you? Because your actions suggest otherwise. You entered a private space without permission. You handled belongings that cost more than your annual salary. You violated the basic protocols that separate professional service from amateur fumbling. The words hit Nina like physical blows. She'd expected consequences for her mistake, but the cruelty in Denton's tone, the way he seemed to take pleasure in her humiliation, cut deeper than any formal reprimand could have. What's worse, Denton continued, warming to his theme, is this note you left behind. He held up the small piece of paper as if it were evidence of a crime. You apologize for your mistake, then have the audacity to claim you've somehow improved the room. As if your unauthorized presence could possibly enhance anything, Mrs. Rodriguez tried to intervene. Mr. Denton, perhaps we could handle this privately. No. His voice brooked no argument. This is exactly the kind of entitled thinking that's ruining service standards everywhere. People who think that good intentions excuse poor judgment. People who believe that crossing boundaries is acceptable as long as you smile while doing it. Nina felt something break inside her chest. Not her spirit, that was stronger than Denton could imagine, but her faith in fairness, in the belief that hard work and good intentions would eventually be recognized and rewarded. Effective immediately, Denton announced, Miss Lane will be transferred to basement storage maintenance. Perhaps some time away from guest areas will help her understand the importance of staying in her proper place. Sometimes the measure of a person isn't how they treat their equals, but how they treat those who can't fight back. Nina's world was about to get much darker before it got lighter. But remember, someone very important had been watching, and he was about to make his presence known. The basement of Solstice Valley Resort was where dreams went to die. Dimly lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs, it housed the industrial machinery that kept the luxury above running smoothly. Massive washing machines rumbled like sleeping giants, pipes groaned with the effort of carrying heated water to distant bathrooms, and the air hung thick with the smell of cleaning chemicals and dampness. Nina's new workspace was a supply closet that had been hastily converted into a sorting station. Her job was to inventory linens, organize cleaning supplies, and maintain equipment that most guests would never know existed. It was honest work, but it felt like exile. For 3 weeks, Nina descended into that basement each morning as the sun painted the mountains gold, and emerged each evening as the last light faded behind the peaks. She spoke to almost no one except Ms. Teresa, the elderly laundry manager who'd worked at the resort for nearly 3 decades. Ms. Teresa had watched Nina's transition from upstairs cleaning to basement inventory with the quiet understanding of someone who'd seen management changes come and go like seasons. She was a woman who measured people by their actions during difficult times rather than their words during easy ones. "Child," Miss Teresa said one evening as they shared a thermos of coffee in the supply room, "I've been watching you these past weeks. Most people who get knocked down this hard either quit or turn bitter. But you're different." Nina looked up from the inventory sheet she was completing. Even in the basement, her work was meticulous, each entry carefully recorded, each count verified twice. "I can't afford to quit," Nina said simply. "And being bitter won't change anything." "That's not why you're different, though, Ms." Teresa's eyes, sharp despite her 78 years, seemed to see straight through to Nina's soul. "You're different because you're still creating beauty down here." It was true. Unable to help herself, Nina had begun sketching during her breaks. The basement, she'd discovered, had its own stark poetry. The play of shadows cast by hanging pipes, the rhythm of workers moving through their duties, the faces of people who kept a luxury resort running from its hidden depths. It was all there, waiting to be captured by someone who cared enough to really see. Her sketchpad filled with images. Ms. Teresa's hands, gentle but strong, folding towels, with the precision of origami. The night security guard pausing in his rounds to help a newer employee. The maintenance crew sharing jokes during their dinner break, their laughter echoing off concrete walls. What Nina didn't know was that her art was about to become the key to everything. Sometimes when life pushes you down, it's actually positioning you to see things from an angle that reveals truths hidden from everyone else. Grant Leo had spent 6 weeks observing his resort through different lenses, and what he'd seen troubled him. The service was impeccable, the facilities maintained to the highest standards, but something was missing. There was efficiency, without warmth, professionalism without passion. His employees went through the motions of hospitality without truly understanding its soul. The incident with Nina Lane had crystallized his concerns. He'd watched the security footage of her time in the royal suite dozens of times, studying not just what she did, but how she did it. Every movement spoke of respect, for the space, for the guests who would occupy it, for the work itself. It was the kind of service that couldn't be taught or mandated. It came from within. When he learned about Denton's public humiliation, of Nina and her subsequent banishment to the basement, Grant felt something he rarely experienced: anger. Not the hot, immediate anger of wounded pride, but the cold, purposeful anger of someone who'd witnessed an injustice that demanded correction. His investigation into Nina's background revealed a story that explained everything. The art school, transcripts, the family financial hardship, the younger brother she was supporting. It painted a picture of someone who'd sacrificed her dreams for her family's stability. But more than that, it explained the care she brought to her work. Someone who understood sacrifice, who'd given up what she loved for what others needed, would naturally treat every task as worthy of her best effort. It was during his review of her personnel file that Grant discovered the sketches. Ms. Teresa had mentioned Nina's artistic abilities to Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd mentioned it to Grant during one of their routine staff meetings. Curious, Grant had asked to see Nina's work, expecting perhaps some pleasant drawings that showed promise. What he found instead were masterpieces. Nina's drawings captured the hidden dignity of service work in ways that made Grant's throat tighten with emotion. Here was his resort as he'd never seen it, not from the perspective of luxury and privilege, but from the viewpoint of those who created that luxury through their daily dedication. The images revealed a world of quiet heroism, of people who took pride in work that others dismissed, of beauty found in the most unexpected places. One drawing in particular stopped Grant cold. It showed Miss Teresa in the laundry room, but Nina had somehow captured more than just the physical scene. The way the light fell across the older woman's face revealed decades of dignity maintained despite society's indifference to her work. The careful composition elevated the mundane task of folding towels into something approaching sacred ritual. This was the moment Grant realized that excellence wasn't about expensive furniture or crystal chandeliers. It was about recognizing the worth in every person and every task. But how do you change an entire culture? How do you show people what they've been too blind to see? Grant spent 3 days developing his plan. It would need to be dramatic, enough to capture everyone's attention, but subtle enough to convey its message without seeming heavy-handed. Most importantly, it would need to honor Nina while teaching the entire resort staff, and particularly Mr. Denton, about the true meaning of service. The announcement came on a Friday morning during the monthly all-staff meeting. Grant had flown in specifically for the occasion, though most employees didn't realize the man in the simple business suit was actually their ultimate boss. Only the senior management knew his true identity. "Ladies and gentlemen," Grant began, his voice carrying easily through the main conference room, "I want to talk to you today about excellence. Not the kind of excellence that gets written about in travel magazines, but the kind that happens when no one is watching." The room was silent. Even Denton, who'd positioned himself prominently in the front row, seemed to sense that something significant was about to occur. 3 weeks ago, a member of our housekeeping staff made what some would call a mistake. She entered the wrong room and spent 45 minutes cleaning it to a standard that exceeded even our highest expectations. But what made this remarkable wasn't the quality of her work. It was the fact that she did this work believing no one would ever know, no one would ever thank her, and no one would ever reward her for it. Grant paused, letting his words settle over the assembled staff like morning mist over the mountains. This employee wrote a note apologizing for her mistake and expressing hope that she had left the room better than she found it. She was subsequently disciplined and transferred to a position where her talents couldn't contribute to our guests' experience. This, I believe, represents a failure of leadership, not hers, but ours. The tension in the room was becoming palpable. Nina, sitting in the back corner, felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She had no idea where this was leading, but she sensed her life was about to change forever. Grant reached into his briefcase and withdrew a folder containing Nina's sketches. "I want to share something with you that speaks to the true spirit of service, the kind of vision that transforms ordinary work into extraordinary meaning." One by one he displayed Nina's drawings, each one projected onto the large screen at the front of the room. The room fell silent as images of their own workplace, their own lives, were revealed as works of art. There was Carlos, the knight, janitor, captured in a moment of quiet concentration as he polished the lobby floor, transformed by Nina's vision into a craftsman perfecting his masterpiece. There was Jennifer from guest services, shown not just answering phones but serving as a bridge between strangers and comfort. Her smile rendered in charcoal as something approaching divine grace. And there, larger than life on the screen, was Ms. Teresa, her weathered hands and lined face revealing decades of dignity that most people had been too busy to notice. "These drawings were created by Nina Lane," Grant continued, "the same employee who was disciplined for entering the wrong room with the right intentions. They were drawn during her break times while working in our basement storage area, where she was transferred as punishment for caring too much about the quality of her work." Grant's eyes found Nina in the crowd, and for the first time in weeks she lifted her head to meet someone's gaze directly. "Miss Lane's mistake taught me something crucial about our organization. We've become so focused on procedures that we've forgotten purpose, so concerned with hierarchy that we've lost sight of humanity, so invested in maintaining boundaries that we've forgotten why those boundaries exist, to serve our guests better, not to diminish our staff's potential." The silence in the room was now complete. Even Denton, his face flushed with what might have been embarrassment or anger, seemed frozen in place. "Effective immediately, we're implementing a new position at Solstice Valley Resort. Artist in Sao. Residents. This person will be responsible for capturing and sharing the stories of excellence that happen every day in our workplace. They'll help us remember that every role here, from housekeeping to management, contributes to something larger than any one person could achieve alone. The transformation was happening in real time. You could see it in people's faces as they realized their work, their lives had been seen, valued, and elevated to art. But Grant wasn't finished yet. "Nina Lane," Grant said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "would you please join me?" Nina felt her legs move independently of her conscious thought. The walk from the back of the room to the front felt like crossing a vast canyon, with every eye in the resort following her progress. When she reached Grant's side, he turned to address the room once more. "I want everyone to understand what we're witnessing here. This is what happens when we recognize excellence instead of punishing it, when we elevate character over compliance, when we choose to see the person behind the position." He turned to Nina, his voice gentler now. "Miss Lane, you entered the wrong room, but you brought the right heart. You were punished for breaking rules, but you never broke faith with the principles that make service meaningful. Your art has shown us ourselves as we truly are, not servants or masters, but partners in creating experiences that make people's lives better." Nina found her voice, though it was still soft, still careful. "Mr. Grant, I don't understand. Who are you?" Grant smiled, and suddenly Nina could see past the expensive suit to the person underneath, someone who understood what it meant to work hard, to care deeply, to believe that excellence was its own reward. "I'm Grant Leo, and this is my resort. But more importantly, I'm someone who's learned that the best leaders don't create followers. They recognize leaders who are already there, waiting to be seen. The applause began slowly, with Miss Teresa's weathered hands coming together in a rhythm that spoke of approval, earned through decades of watching people come and go. It built gradually, spreading through the room like sunrise over the mountains, until even some of the management staff were standing. Denton remained seated, his face a mask of confusion and something that might have been the beginning of shame. This was the moment when everything changed, not just for Nina but for everyone who witnessed it, because sometimes the most powerful transformation happens when someone in authority chooses to use their power to lift others up, instead of keeping them down. The morning sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and pink as Nina set up her easel in the resort's main lobby. In the 6 months since her promotion to artist in residence, she'd transformed not just her own life, but the entire culture of Solstice Valley Resort. Her art now hung throughout the property, not as decoration but as celebration. Each piece told the story of someone whose work contributed to the guests' experience, whose dedication made luxury possible. The response from visitors had been overwhelming. Travel magazines wrote about the resort where the staff were honored, as artists where service came from the heart rather than from training manuals. But the real transformation was harder to quantify and more profound. Staff turnover had dropped to nearly zero. Guest satisfaction scores had reached levels that other resorts could only dream of. Most importantly, there was a different feeling in the air. A sense that everyone, from the newest housekeeping trainee to the most senior manager, was part of something meaningful. Nina still cleaned rooms sometimes, by choice, rather than assignment. She'd discovered that understanding every aspect of the resort's operation made her art more authentic, her leadership more credible. When she trained new employees, she didn't just teach them procedures. She helped them understand that their work was a form of artistry, that excellence was a choice they made every day. Ms. Teresa had become something of a celebrity among the staff, her quiet wisdom now sought by employees who'd never noticed her before. She'd started teaching informal classes about the dignity of labor, sharing stories from her 3 decades of service that revealed the profound impact that genuine care could have on strangers' lives. But what about Mr. Denton? What happens to someone who built their identity on being superior to others, only to discover that superiority was just an illusion they'd maintained by refusing to see clearly? Mr. Denton returned to the resort 8 months after Nina's promotion, ostensibly to check on his investments in the area. But those who knew him best understood that he came back because he couldn't stay away from the scene of his education. The changes were immediately apparent. The staff moved differently, with a confidence that came from knowing their work was valued. Guests commented not just on the luxury of their accommodations, but on the genuine warmth of the service. There was an intangible quality in the air, a sense that everyone, from the parking attendant to the general manager, was part of a shared mission. Denton requested a meeting with Grant, ostensibly to discuss business matters. But when they sat down in Grant's office, overlooking the mountains that had witnessed so much change, their conversation took a different direction. "I've been thinking about what happened with that girl," Denton began, his voice lacking its usual authority. "Nina." Grant waited, understanding that sometimes the most important conversations require patience. "I spent my whole life believing that respect was something you demanded, not something you earned. That authority meant making others smaller, so you could appear larger." Denton's hands, spotted with age, trembled slightly. "I was wrong." It was perhaps the first time in decades that Harold Denton had admitted to being wrong about anything. "The hardest part," he continued, "is realizing how many people I diminished along the way. How many Nina Lanes I never saw because I was too busy making sure they knew their place." Grant leaned forward. "The question isn't what you did before, Harold. The question is what you do now. Redemption isn't always possible, but recognition is. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give to those we've wronged is the acknowledgement that they deserved better, and the commitment to be better ourselves." As Nina packed up her easel that evening, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from invisible cleaning lady to artist, from someone who thought her dreams were over to someone who'd discovered that dreams have a way of evolving into something better than we ever imagined. Her younger brother had called that morning from college that was now possible because Nina's salary as artist in residence, combined with the sales of her artwork, had transformed their family's financial situation. But more than the money, it was the pride in his voice that filled her heart. Pride not just in her success, but in the way she'd achieved it, with integrity, with kindness, with a refusal to let circumstances diminish her character. The note she'd left in room 130 that Tuesday morning had become the resort's unofficial motto. "I hope I've left this place better than I found it." It was printed on small cards that every employee carried, a daily reminder that their work wasn't just about maintaining standards. It was about improving lives, one small act of excellence at a time. That evening, as Nina walked through the resort's corridors, she passed dozens of her drawings. Each one told a story of dignity recognized, of excellence celebrated, of ordinary people doing extraordinary work because they understood that service, real service, was a form of love made visible. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the one that couldn't be captured in art or measured in metrics. It was the change in how people saw themselves and each other, the understanding that true worth isn't found in the room you're allowed to enter, but in how you behave when you think no one is watching. That real leadership isn't about having power over others, but about using whatever influence you have to help others discover their own strength. The truth is, we're all being watched, not by security cameras or supervisors, but by the part of ourselves that knows the difference between right and wrong, between excellence and mediocrity, between treating others as stepping stones or as fellow travelers on the journey toward becoming our best selves.